Welcome to my unfiltered podcast, To Be Free, a podcast that illuminates the pathway to true freedom. I'm your host, Laura Jane Haver, and I'm so grateful that you're tuning in with me today. Thank you for being here. If you haven't listened to episode 0 yet, I actually suggest starting there just to get to know more about what this podcast is all about and why I was called to create this podcast and send it out into the world. To sum it up real quick, I am on a mission to help as many people as I can create a life of true, authentic, heart and soul aligned freedom. And this podcast is here to remind you of your power to break free from the cage of conformity and the restrictive realm of supposed to do's and should be's to create the life you truly desire, the life that is radically aligned with your true north, the life that brings you a feeling of deep purpose, fuck yes energy, and freedom. And to quickly reintroduce myself, I'm a former corporate sales exec turned passionate freedompreneur. As a freedompreneur, I mentor those who are waking up to their higher calling and traversing through what I call the in-between. The in-between is the transformational space between where you are and where you are called to be. It's the void between who you were and who you are becoming. And this is the powerful space where I meet you. And this is where this podcast supports your evolution and journey to freedom. So, welcome to my unfiltered corner of the internet. You can also join my community at laurajanehaver.com. So, to begin my story of how I got here today recording this podcast, let's rewind to last year in May when I became a mama to the sweetest baby boy named Atlas Soul, who's my whole world. He's the soul to my universe, and being his mama is my greatest purpose on earth and truly my greatest dream come true. I have never been more invigorated in my entire life to create a life of freedom for him, so he knows what it feels like. My husband Brian and I are showing him that anything is possible in this world and that we are limitless. He's limitless. There is no such thing as unrealistic in our family because we are free to pursue whatever we choose in this beautiful life of infinite possibilities. And Atlas is the reason I birthed this podcast. My journey from maiden to mother reactivated so much inspiration, strength, and creativity within me. Like, I had been actually thinking about starting a podcast for a few years, pondering it, imagining it, but I never felt that magnetic pull towards taking action and actually going for it. I felt inner resistance. And a big part of that was that I was still healing parts of myself that carried this fear of being seen and this fear of being heard in such an authentically raw way. There was still this fear of judgment, ridicule, and just caring too much about how other people perceived me. And I was allowing those fears to hold me back. And it created doubt around my voice, my expression, and my potential. But I was totally reborn when Atlas was born. The world looked and felt different. And I was guided to immerse myself in a lot of deep multidimensional healing during pregnancy and especially postpartum. After I gave birth, I experienced that like really intense postpartum haze that many of us mamas experience and not enough mamas talk about. And I was immersed in so much emotional energy. This was an opportunity for me to deeply tune into myself and be really honest with myself about the woman and mother I desire to be, that I choose to be, that I'm here to be, that I am becoming. And I became so determined to create the life that aligns with my highest self and highest embodiment, the one that makes me feel the most lit up and free for my child. And in the process, I ended up burning a lot of things to the ground that no longer resonated with me. And that's how I was making space for the new to come through. I let it all go. I blessed and released. And when I was moving out of the postpartum haze, I began receiving very clear universal messages around what I am now meant to create. And this podcast came into my consciousness so vividly. And a few months later, I felt this like, let's freaking go energy move through me to start creating it. It was calling me. I was so invigorated and so inspired to just go for it. And the ideas just started flowing through me so naturally, and it's felt so easy. And this podcast feels so liberating, so freeing, because I'm finally sharing my truth out loud and sharing my authentic voice with the world. Now, of course, I still have some fears pop up around like putting myself out there in such a vulnerable and unfamiliar way. And of course, there's still that inner voice like, what if people judge me? Which it's totally normal, right, to feel these fears when we're conquering something new. But I'm no longer allowing these fears to overwhelm me nor hold me back, because I feel so much more powerful as a mother. Atlas's birth rebirthed some serious warrior energy within me, and I feel unstoppable. I care so much less about how people perceive me because I know who I am. I love who I am. I know my worth. I know my gifts, and I know what I'm here for. I know my mission. And my mission is to light the way forward towards true freedom. And part of my mission is to also show what is possible even while raising our children. I'm here to remind like all you big visionaries, especially those of you who are mamas or plan to be mamas one day, or fathers, that pursuing your higher calling and your greatest dreams and desires is more than possible with kids. And actually, we should be pursuing our dreams for them, lighting our dreams up for them, to show them the way forward into a new liberating paradigm. We are here to break the cycle of settling for our children and future generations. Personally, so many people used to tell me that the freedom ends when you have kids. And I received so much unsolicited advice like, enjoy your freedom while you can, or you're going to have to settle down. And I was just never going to allow those disempowering beliefs into my consciousness. That wasn't going to be my reality, and it didn't resonate within my heart. Not at all. And you know what I know for sure now that I'm a mama? Our kids don't hold us back. It's our conditioned beliefs around what life should look like or what life is supposed to look like with kids that hold us back. And we have the freedom to choose our beliefs. So now here I am recording this podcast from a jungle oasis in Costa Rica, where the jungle meets the ocean. Brian and I followed our hearts and visions and moved our family to a beautiful beach town in Costa Rica when Atlas was 6 months old. And this is where we feel the most free and where we call home in this moment. And I say moment because we choose not to anchor ourselves to any specific location. Our vision is to live seasonally in our favorite places in the world. But right now, in this moment, I'm here. And I get to work on creative projects like this podcast while immersed in such a beautiful place, while also being a full-time mama. I get to hang out with Atlas every single day, most of the day, because I have designed a 4-day work week with 4-hour work days. And my heart is so full. I feel so freaking expansive and so free. So that was the story of the birth of this podcast. Now let's rewind about 5 years and talk about the first phase of my spiritual awakening journey, the journey that led me to leave the corporate world to pursue freedompreneurship. And if you aren't sure what a freedompreneur is, I added my own personal definition in the podcast episode notes. I am called to share my awakening story because this was when I began waking up to all the ways in which I was not truly free. And I know that by sharing my own story, I can be a mirror of sorts, and so many of you listening will feel seen. You'll feel less alone on your own journey. It's really so empowering when we can have real, honest, raw conversations about our experiences. And I truly believe we're all here to empower and support one another by sharing our stories and our wisdom so we can all rise up to our higher potential together and guide each other back home to freedom. And our story is our medicine. Our real life experience is our truth, and within our scars holds our wisdom. We are here to guide others through the trenches we have conquered and the mountaintops we now stand upon. And as I share my truth and wisdom, it creates a ripple effect where more and more people are inspired to speak their truth and wisdom as well. So here we go. My awakening began in 2018 when I was working at Google as a sales executive, and at the time I was based in New York City. Up until that point, I had been working in the corporate and big tech world for a little over 9 years. I had worked at companies like News Corp, Square, and Google twice. And the second time around is when I had my awakening. During that time in my life, I spent most of my days hustling to make quotas while chasing after promotions and fancy job titles. This was truly, literally my primary focus in life and where most of my energy went. And I was making most of my life decisions based on what looked the best on paper, and I was striving to fit myself into this mold of success, the mold that we are conditioned to believe success should look like, because this gave me my sense of self-worth, and it was how I measured my value in the world. And on the outside, I was seen as super successful and thriving. I was living it up for sure. But on the inside, it was a totally different story. I felt totally uninspired, drained, suppressed, and unfulfilled. And it was starting to feel just really heavy on my heart. I began to see and feel within the depth of my soul the restrictive realm I was anchored in, which was created from societal expectations, conditioning, programming, fears, and limiting beliefs. It felt like an energetic cage that I was holding myself hostage in. And this cage was blocking my alignment with my authentic self, my true desires and gifts, and my highest visions. I felt really restricted and trapped. I just didn't feel free. But to be honest, this contrast was exactly what I was meant to experience for my personal growth and evolution. Many times we're meant to be exactly where we are, even if it feels restrictive and it's not in alignment with our highest calling nor our greatest dreams, because contrast gives rise to clarity. How do we know what feels super expansive and freeing if we never experience the feeling of being restricted and suppressed? How do we know what lights us up if we don't know what dims us down? And how do we know what we truly want in life until we experience what we no longer want to experience? Every chapter of our life brings both the contrast and clarity that makes us so much more self-aware and aligned and gives us the opportunity to evolve. So wherever you are right now in your journey, whatever chapter you're in and whatever contrast you're experiencing, honor it because you're right where you're meant to be. And that chapter in that moment in time was perfect for me. It was my comfort zone, my familiarity, the realm I lived in that brought me a sense of stability and security. I felt safe there. I also received a ton of external praise and approval during that time because I was following the path expected of me, the path accepted by the majority, the path I believed I had to take, and the only path I saw ahead of me. And I excelled at it. And you know what? I'm so grateful for that path. I am especially grateful for the money I earned that allowed me to go into freedompreneurship without financial stress. I also learned so much about business, sales, being in my masculine energy, and grit and perseverance. And huge bonus, I met so many incredible people, including my husband, through that world. So I'm extremely appreciative for that chapter for sure. But my evolution required me to leave that world and expand into another, which became crystal clear in 2018 when I experienced the beginning of my spiritual awakening, which shocked me because this was a time in my life in which I was not connected to my spirituality at all. I was totally tuned out and focused on my external reality. I was not tuned into my higher consciousness, nor my multidimensionality, nor the quantum realm of energy. I actually thought that spiritual awakenings and talks of manifestation were just like woo-woo, airy-fairy, hocus-pocus talk. So I was in for a big, rude awakening. So there I was, thriving on the outside, living it up in New York City, but feeling trapped and wearing golden handcuffs on the inside and feeling like facets of myself were just so beyond suppressed, just yearning to be expressed. I had been unhappy and drained by the work I was immersed in for a long time, and I craved something totally different, something expansive, more aligned, more creative, and more freeing, like a totally different paradigm. But I was in a total comfort bubble. I was pretending to be happy in my job because it was easier than being honest with myself. So I continued on wearing a facade, playing the part of thriving businesswoman, and convincing myself I was happy. But there was a gentle inner voice that started streaming through my consciousness. And it was telling me, like, Laura, listen, this ain't it. This isn't what you were born to do. There is more to life than this for you. This chapter is ending, and it's time to move on. It's time to have faith. It's time to take the leap. It's time to answer the call. I heard this deep inner voice, this calling, every single day. Yet I chose to tune it out and keep holding on because there was another inner voice, my ego, which was a lot louder and way more convincing. And my ego had totally different priorities. My ego cared more about external image, approval, and validation. My ego cared more about my LinkedIn profile and receiving outward praise for being the best employee I could be. My ego determined my worth through performance reviews and promotions. My ego cared more about staying in the comfort bubble to feel cozy and secure. And my ego reminded me of all the reasons my higher visions just weren't realistic or were not possible because our ego isn't tapped into the quantum. Our soul is. And my ego just really wanted to protect me from any risk of judgment, failure, or disapproval. So the voice of my ego told me to stay exactly where I was and keep following the path I was on because it felt safer than taking a leap into the unknown. Whereas the gentle inner voice, the intuitive voice, the voice of my higher self was nudging me towards my deepest heart desires and higher visions. My higher self was telling me to trust in the unseen and the unknown, and that anything is possible, and that it was time to start carving my own path as a pioneer towards all that lights me up, towards my true north. But I was dominantly in my ego at the time and had been for pretty much a decade. So I continued chasing a moving target of happiness and immersing myself in super hustle and consume mode. I was grinding 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, living for the weekends. Every weekday morning, I remember just looking forward to the workday ending so I could watch Netflix shows or go to happy hour. And I definitely experienced the Sunday scaries and the Monday blues. And I was on a mission to keep myself entertained all the time, so I wouldn't have any time to tune into myself and hear that inner voice telling me that there was more for me beyond this paradigm. I was basically running away from it. And since I was running away from it, the universe got real involved. What you resist persists. And things started going a bit crazy. There was a big cosmic shakeup. Everything started crumbling and tumbling. It felt like my world was falling apart. You guys, when it feels like your world is falling apart, it's because the foundation can no longer hold you. So much drama started happening at work that was just so absurd. And it almost felt like I could have been on a reality TV show. I felt like I was being punked. There was conflict with colleagues, management, and operations. There was one fire drill after the next. And in the midst of the chaos, I started to really see and feel the smoke and mirrors, the restrictive, authoritative rules, the supposed to do's, the deception, and the facades and inauthenticity all around me. I also realized that I was wearing a costume that felt so inauthentic. I was hiding parts of myself just to fit into this corporate environment, and I felt like I couldn't express my true voice. I had to filter and censor myself all the time to protect my job. I had to pretend things were great when they weren't. I had to agree when I actually disagreed. And I had to do tasks I didn't feel good doing or I hated doing just because my superior told me to. I started to tune into the energetics of the matrix. And I will be talking a lot about the matrix on this podcast, not this episode, but future ones. So we will get into that. So don't you worry. And so at this point, I felt suffocated. I remember thinking to myself, wow, I have zero freedom of my time, my space, nor my energy. And these are my most precious assets. I don't even like being here. Why am I giving so much of myself away, so much of my power away? And why am I suppressing so much of who I am and what I truly want in life for this, for an image, for so-called illusory security and a paycheck? But at the same time, I kept trying to see only the positive and ignoring the negative. But that's just not how the world works. We live in a world of polarity. There are both positive and negative aspects. And when we ignore the negative, we are trying to bypass the universal law of polarity, which goes against our nature. And this creates even more resistance in our life. You guys, when the negative outweighs the positive, it's time to be really honest about it and face it. It's not the time to preach good vibes only. So I faced it, and all the negativity made it so hard for me to focus or get any work done. I would just like zombie stare into my computer screen each day and like zone the F out. I would be looking at my screensaver of Bali and daydreaming of living abroad, exploring the world, and working on my own creative business, living a life of expansion, authentic expression, and freedom. Freedom to create whatever I wanted to create, and freedom to do whatever I wanted to do on a Monday. And as I started to become more and more conscious of the restrictive paradigm I was anchored in, things started getting heavier and denser. I would get to work and feel immediately drained and depleted. Sometimes I felt like I wanted to cry for like no reason. I started to feel physically off. Like many days while at the office, I experienced headaches, nausea, and raging anxiety. And this was a physical manifestation of what was going on energetically. It was my soul trying to shake me awake, like it's time to let go. And then I experienced a sudden friendship breakup, which shattered me and made me see even more clearly all the things in my life that no longer served me nor brought me joy. I reevaluated all of my relationships, my job, my lifestyle, my habits, my patterns. I became super conscious of everything that was depleting me and suppressing my soul, and all the ways I just wasn't being true to myself. And I remember having such a huge realization in the midst of all the heaviness. I realized that I was living for someone else's dream and not my own. This wasn't my dream. Maybe it had been 8 years prior, 5 years prior, but it just wasn't anymore. My dream was to travel the world and experience the unknown. I craved freedom. I wanted to immerse myself in the unfamiliar. I wanted to pursue my love for writing and mentoring others. I desired the adventure and excitement of entrepreneurship. I desired to help people on a deep soul level and to touch people's hearts through my words. I wanted to follow my calling of helping as many people as I can create a radically aligned life of freedom. So the inner voice got even louder, reminding me that I wasn't born on earth to do this anymore. I could keep forcing it and keep pretending to be in alignment and keep staying in my comfort bubble and keep protecting my image, but it wasn't going to serve me, nor my highest self, nor my highest good. So I finally tuned in deeply. I knew within my heart it was time to let go. The corporate paradigm just no longer aligned with my soul. It served my evolution well for 9 years, but at this point, I felt like I was going to explode. I felt so bottled up. I just couldn't be in that realm anymore. It was time to move on. It was time to cut the cords and lift the anchors. It was time to take a leap of faith, knowing the universe would catch me. So I finally answered the call, and I turned my breakdown into a breakthrough. I decided to leave Google, made an exit plan, and Brian and I booked one-way tickets to travel the world. And the 9-year corporate chapter officially closed so that a new, beautiful chapter could begin. I was the author of a brand new chapter, and I could go any direction I wanted to go. My options were limitless. And that was the day I realized I was officially journeying through the in-between, the transformational space between where I was and where I was called to be, the beautiful void between who I was and who I was becoming. And I had this incredible opportunity to redesign my life. I chose to activate unwavering belief in myself and my higher calling and higher visions. And I began shifting my entire perception of reality, and my reality changed. And since that time, I have been carving my own path as a trailblazer, following my true north, following all that lights me up, following my higher visions and greatest dreams. I've traveled to 37 countries, created a passion blog, became a freedompreneur, started 2 businesses, immersed myself in so many new modalities like website building, energy healing, quantum energetics, human design. And Brian and I road tripped around the USA in a travel trailer. We moved to Costa Rica. We then brought a beautiful, magnificent, incredible baby boy into the world, and I became a mama. And now I started this podcast. I have become totally vulnerable to life. And now I'm the living embodiment of my mission and my higher calling to lead the world, to lead you back to pure, authentic, heart and soul aligned freedom. So here we are. And to end this episode, I want to acknowledge that there's been a huge cosmic shakeup in the universe, and so many people have lost their jobs recently. And if you're one of them, my heart truly goes out to you. You're supposed to feel all the feelings, the anger, frustration, confusion, and we're meant to feel all these emotions. It's energy in motion because we're human. But as you move through the emotional energy, instead of trying to figure out where your next paycheck is coming from or trying to get the next similar gig, I want you to realize that you're in the in-between. And this is a universal gift. You have the opportunity to totally redesign your life. You know, sometimes the universe comes in and has to make moves for us because we were just hanging on for too long. Our world has to get shaken up so we get uncomfortable and make big changes and take huge leaps. So take some time and reflect on what doors this opens up for you. Instead of, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen for me? How can you shift and alchemize your situation? How can you turn this breakdown into a breakthrough? You have a chance to create a new, radically aligned path towards your greatest visions and desires. And you are so supported in whatever path you choose. But just check in with yourself and ask yourself, what path will make me feel the most free? And with that, thank you everyone for tuning in with me today. I'm so grateful. Until next time.